The road was gone. Dale Marin stood at the edge of the excavation trench, boots planted in compacted dust, and stared at the place where it had been. 60 meters below him, the old asphalt was exposed like a dark vein in the sandstone, cracked, buckled, half consumed by the mineral intrusion that had swallowed most of the pre-consolidation surface layer millennia ago. But it was unmistakably a road. 2 lanes, painted lines still faintly visible beneath the mineral crust. The kind of road that once connected small towns across a continent, back when the word town meant something fewer than 10,000 people could fill. 90,000 years ago. His field recorder was blinking amber. He pressed the log button without looking at it. Marin, Site 12, Western Reclamation Zone. 0714 local. The exposure is confirmed. Pre-consolidation asphalt surface, 2-lane configuration bearing nor-northwest. Sediment overlay consistent with late Anthropocene deposition. I'm estimating the original construction at approximately 92,000 years before present, give or take 4 centuries. He paused. The road led somewhere, I don't know where yet. He clipped the recorder to his belt and climbed down into the trench. The descent was 12 meters by rope ladder, his preference over the mechanical lift, because the lift vibrated and the vibration loosened sediment from the trench walls, and loosened sediment meant lost context. Context was everything. An artifact without its surrounding matrix was a word without a sentence. It could mean anything, which meant it meant nothing. Dale Marin was 53 years old, and he had spent 31 of those years digging into the bones of what Earth used to be. He was a terrestrial archaeologist, a specialist in the deep pre-consolidation layers, the strata that predated the great reshaping of Earth's surface, the era before humanity rebuilt the planet from crust to exosphere. Most people in the modern cities knew the broad strokes of history. They knew that humanity had once been fragile, scattered, divided. They knew about the departure the day the aliens left, 90,000 years ago, when the Vithrani Communion abandoned Earth after 3 centuries of colonial presence, stripping their installations and taking their technology with them, leaving humanity alone on a damaged world with nothing but the memory of what had been done to them. They knew about the long recovery, the slow, grinding centuries of rebuilding, the wars that nearly ended it all, the plagues, the ice, and then, eventually, the moment when humanity stopped merely surviving and began, with cold and patient discipline, to build something the galaxy had never seen. What most people did not know, what Dale spent his career uncovering, was what the world had looked like before all of that. The ordinary world. The roads that connected places with names nobody remembered. The foundations of houses where people had raised children and argued about money and watched the sky for rain. The small, human-scale debris of a civilization that had existed before anyone knew there were aliens at all. That was what haunted him, not the grand ruins, not the defense platforms or the first-generation shield arrays or the consolidation-era mega-foundations. The small things, a road, a doorstep, a ceramic fragment with a faded pattern that some anonymous potter had pressed into wet clay with their thumb. The trench was cool at this depth. The walls showed clean stratigraphy, banded layers of geological time compressed into visible cross-section. Dale ran his hand along the exposed asphalt and felt the roughness of it, the aggregate texture of crushed stone and bitumen, that someone had mixed and poured and smoothed 90,000 years before he was born. His team was not due to arrive for another hour. He had come early, as he always did. The site was his private cathedral in the pre-dawn quiet, before the noise of generators and drill rigs and undergraduate questions filled the air. His comm chimed. Dr. Marin. The voice belonged to Corporal Senna Voss, the military liaison assigned to his dig site by the Western Rampart Authority. Every excavation in the reclamation zone operated under military oversight, not because the sites were dangerous, but because the reclamation zone sat within the outer defense perimeter of the Tethys Rampart, and anything that broke ground near the rampart's foundations required clearance. "Corporal, we have a detection event. Long-range arrays picked up a transit signature at 0641. Multiple contacts entering the outer system from the Keithring corridor." Dale's hand stopped on the asphalt. He looked up at the sky, visible as a pale strip above the trench walls. Clear, blue, the faint silver thread of an orbital platform crossing from west to east, catching the early sun. "What kind of contacts?" "Fleet configuration, 40-plus vessels." The signature profile matches V-Thrani colonial-era drive emissions. The air in the trench went very still. V-Thrani. The name landed in his chest like a stone dropped into water. 90,000 years. The Communion had left Earth 90,000 years ago, and in all that time, through the long recovery, through the consolidation, through the building of the ramparts and the orbital networks and the warship fleets that now ringed the planet like a crown of iron, they had never come back. Until now. "Understood," he said. His voice was steady, his hands were not. "What's the response status?" "Rampart Command is at Condition 2. The Tethys fleet is moving to intercept positions. Planetary shield network is on standby. Dr. Marin, I need you to secure the site and prepare for possible evacuation." Evacuation. Standard protocol for a detection event in the outer defense zone. You know the drill. He did. He had practiced it twice a year for the past 4 years, since his dig site had been approved within the rampart perimeter. Pack the sensitive artifacts, seal the trench, board the transport, ride back to the city behind the inner wall. He had never expected to do it for real. The drills had always felt like theater, something designed for a threat that existed in briefing documents but not in reality. Earth's defense network was so vast, so layered, so deeply integrated into the planet's infrastructure, that the idea of anyone actually challenging it seemed academic. He looked at the road beneath his boots. 90,000 years old, older than the ramparts, older than the consolidation, older than the warships in orbit, a piece of the world as it was before humanity learned what the sky contained. "Give me 30 minutes," he said. 20, Voss replied. "Transport is en route." He climbed out of the trench and walked back to the field station, a prefab structure perched on the edge of the excavation, its solar panels angled toward the morning sun. Inside, the tables were covered with cataloged finds from the previous week's dig. Ceramic fragments, corroded metal objects. A glass bottle, miraculously intact, with a faded label that his imaging equipment had partially reconstructed. The word route and a number, 66, and what might have been a stylized image of a desert landscape. He had found the bottle 3 days ago in a collapsed structure adjacent to the road. It was a souvenir. Someone had bought it at a roadside stop, probably, and brought it home and set it on a shelf and never thought about it again. The bottle had outlasted the person, the shelf, the house, the town, the civilization that built the town, and the 3 centuries of alien occupation that came after. It had outlasted 90,000 years. And now it sat on a folding table in a prefab hut, while the sky filled with the descendants of the people who had once considered its makers beneath notice. Dale packed the bottle first. He worked quickly, wrapping artifacts in stabilization foam and placing them in transport crates. His hands moved with the automatic precision of long practice, but his mind was somewhere else, somewhere deep, where memory lived. Each artifact had its own entry in his catalog: material, dimensions, stratigraphy, provisional dating, condition notes. Each one was a fragment of a story he would spend months or years trying to reconstruct. A corroded iron hinge from a door that had opened and closed 10,000 times before the house around it fell. A ceramic dish cracked in half, with a glaze pattern that suggested manufacture in a regional workshop, mass-produced, once common, now unique. The ordinary debris of ordinary lives, preserved by accident and recovered by stubbornness. He had been 12 years old, the first time his grandfather took him to a ruin. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when the world shifted beneath him. Oren Marin, 78 years old, lean and straight-backed, leading his grandson through the exposed foundation of a pre-consolidation structure in the Eastern Reclamation Zone. The structure had been a school, according to the survey records. 4 walls, collapsed roof, interior partitions barely traceable in the compacted rubble. Oren had knelt beside a section of exposed flooring and brushed the dust away with his bare hands, and beneath the dust was a patterned colored tiles set into the floor, faded but intact. A mosaic, geometric shapes in blue and gold. Someone made that, Oren had said. Not a machine, a person. They chose those colors. They set each tile by hand. They did it knowing that 1,000 children would walk across it and never look down. Dale had been 12. He had looked down. That's the job, his grandfather had said. We look down. We look at what everyone else walks over. Because if we don't, then those people, the ones who chose those colors and set those tiles, they disappear. And they don't deserve to disappear. Oren Marin had died 11 years ago in his bed in the city of Tethys, with the lights of the orbital platforms visible through his window. He had spent 60 years digging into the pre-consolidation layers, recovering the remnants of ordinary lives from beneath the foundations of the civilization that had been built on top of them. He had never found anything that would make the history texts. No weapons, no technology, no strategic intelligence. Just the small, stubborn evidence that people had lived here before the world became what it was now. Dale had inherited his grandfather's tools, his field notes, and his conviction that the small things mattered. He had also inherited the old man's habit of talking to the dead, not in any spiritual sense, but in the quiet, practical way of a man who believed that every artifact was one half of a conversation. When Dale held a ceramic fragment and tried to reconstruct the vessel it had come from, he was listening. When he mapped the foundation of a collapsed house and tried to imagine the rooms, the furniture, the view from the window, he was answering. The conversation was never complete. There was always a gap, a silence where the voice of the original maker should have been. And Dale had made his peace with that silence, the way all archaeologists do, the way all people who study the dead must do. But he had never stopped hoping that somewhere, somehow, the silence might break. Dale sealed the last crate and carried it to the loading bay. Through the station's east-facing window, he could see the first threads of vapor trails high in the atmosphere, the Tethys fleet's interceptor wings, climbing to station. They moved in formation, 7 parallel lines converging toward the upper atmosphere like arrows drawn across the sky. Beyond them, in the deep blue, something glinted. The defense platforms were adjusting their orientation, subtle shifts in angle that were invisible from the ground unless you knew what to look for. Dale knew. He had grown up watching them. Every child in Tethys learned to read the platforms the way children in the pre-consolidation era had learned to read clouds. A 5-degree rotation meant the network was tracking something. A 10-degree rotation meant it was preparing to engage. The platforms were at 7 degrees and climbing. His comm chimed again. Voss, Dr. Marin, the detection count has been revised. 61 contacts now. Additional vessels have emerged from the Keithring corridor behind the main formation. 61. The number landed quietly without drama, the way all the worst numbers do. The transport arrived 8 minutes later, a military ground vehicle, armored and fast, piloted by a young soldier who looked like she was trying very hard to appear calm. Corporal Voss was in the passenger seat. Dr. Marin, we need to go. The artifacts are loaded. The trench is sealed. He paused at the vehicle's open door and looked back at the excavation site. The trench was a dark scar in the brown earth, the exposed road visible at the bottom like a path that led to nowhere. The road down there goes north. I was going to follow it tomorrow, see where it led. It'll still be there when this is over, Voss said. He got into the vehicle. Through the rear window as they pulled away, he watched the excavation site shrink, the trench, the prefab station, the mound of excavated earth piled beside it. 4 years of careful, painstaking work, reduced to a dark smudge on the brown landscape. Somewhere beneath that smudge, the road continued north. Somewhere beneath the road, something waited that Dale did not yet know about and could not yet imagine. They drove east toward the city. The reclamation zone was flat, open terrain, engineered grassland over the old continental surface, maintained by the Tethys Agricultural Authority. The road they drove on was modern, a smooth composite surface that could support military vehicles at speed. It ran straight toward the Tethys inner wall, which was visible from 40 kilometers out as a dark line on the horizon, rising gradually into visibility as the distance closed. Along the way, they passed 3 automated defense stations that Dale had driven past 100 times without thinking about. Today, for the first time, each one had its emitter array raised and tracking tall, slim turrets rotating in slow arcs, their targeting systems painting the sky with invisible survey beams. A convoy of military transports passed them heading west, toward the reclamation zone perimeter. Dale counted 14 vehicles before he stopped counting. Halfway to the wall, Voss received another update through her earpiece and relayed it without turning around. Fleet count confirmed at 64, lead elements crossing the Jovian orbital threshold. Rampart Command has elevated to Condition 1 Bravo across the Western Hemisphere. 1 Bravo, that was one step below full combat readiness. Dale had never heard the designation used outside a training scenario. The inner wall was not a wall in the ancient sense. It was a defense infrastructure, a 300-meter-tall integrated barrier of hardened metamaterial, sensor arrays, weapons emplacements, and shield generators that encircled the city of Tethys and its dependent settlements. It had been built during the Third Consolidation, roughly 35,000 years ago, and it had been continuously upgraded ever since. The wall was not the city's primary defense. The orbital platforms and the warship fleets handled that. The wall was the last line, the statement of principle that said, even if everything above us fails, you still have to get through this. Dale had grown up inside that wall. He had played in its shadow as a child, climbed its lower maintenance levels as a teenager, studied its engineering as a university student before deciding that the ancient world interested him more than the modern one. The wall was the most visible symbol of what humanity had become: patient, prepared, and unwilling to be caught unready ever again. They passed through the eastern gate and into the city proper. Tethys was enormous, a megacity of layered platforms and vertical districts, population 42 million, its upper tiers reaching high enough that the air was thin and the sky took on a deeper blue. The streets were busy but not panicked. The population knew the drill. Detection events were uncommon but not unheard of: sensor ghosts, rogue asteroid signatures, occasionally a genuine probe from one of the minor spacefaring civilizations that populated the nearer reaches of the spiral arm. The city treated them the way a fortress treated a distant alarm, with attention but without fear. This one was different. Dale could feel it in the texture of the military traffic: more vehicles, more personnel, the checkpoints manned by soldiers who were not merely present but actively scanning. On the upper tiers, the city's external display boards, normally reserved for weather data and transit schedules, showed a single rotating advisory in calm white text: Condition 2, Defense Network active, no action required. The phrase, "no action required," was doing more work than any phrase in the human language had ever been asked to do. Voss drove him to the Tethys Archaeological Institute, a broad, low-slung building on the 6th platform level, overlooking the central plaza. His department occupied the East Wing pre-consolidation studies, 12 faculty, 31 graduate students, and a conservation lab that smelled permanently of mineral stabilizer. Through the lab's north windows, The upper hull of a Tethys-class warship was visible where it had not been that morning, a dark edge cutting across the sky like a new horizon line. So large that from this angle Dale could see the individual maintenance gantries along its port flank. The ship had moved into close atmosphere position sometime in the last hour, and it hung above the city with the serene indifference of geography. His colleague Adra Pell was waiting for him in the main lab. She was tall, dark-haired, 15 years his senior, and she had the look of someone who had been awake for longer than she should have been. "You heard," she said. "Vithrani, 40-plus ships." 47. The count firmed up 20 minutes ago. They're decelerating. Current trajectory puts them in high orbit within 36 hours. 36 hours. Dale set his crates on the lab bench and began unpacking. His hands needed something to do. "Has there been communication?" he asked. The Tethys fleet hailed them on the standard frequencies. No response yet. Rampart Command is treating it as a potential incursion. "It's been 90,000 years, Adra. What do they want?" Pell looked at him with the expression she reserved for questions she had already asked herself, and not liked the answer to. "That's the question everyone is asking. The working theory at Rampart Command is that it's a return expedition. The Vithrani Communion conducted colonial operations on Earth for approximately 300 years, ending with the departure. They stripped most of their visible installations when they left, but they left infrastructure behind deep site facilities, buried resource caches, and at least one sealed repository that the consolidation-era surveys never located. The thinking is that they've come back to collect what they left. 61 ships to collect a storage locker. The count went up again while you were in transit. 61 vessels confirmed, possibly more still emerging from the corridor. It's not a raiding party, Dale. It's a bureaucratic expedition. The Vithrani don't do anything with fewer than 50 ships. Their administrative protocols require redundancy at every level. It's how they operated during the occupation. 30 ships to do the work, 30 ships to watch the 30 doing the work. After 90,000 years. Time moves differently for a civilization that spans star systems. 90,000 years might be one administrative cycle for all we know. Dale unwrapped the glass bottle and set it on the lab bench under the imaging lamp. Route 66, a souvenir from a world that had not yet learned it was not alone. He held it up to the light and turned it slowly. The glass was thick, slightly cloudy, with a seam line running vertically where the mold had joined. Machine-made, mass-produced, one of probably 10,000 identical bottles that had sat on shelves in roadside shops across a continent that no longer existed in recognizable form. Each one bought by a traveler who wanted a small, tangible piece of the place they had passed through. A token, a memory rendered in glass. He thought about the person who had bought this particular bottle. He thought about them pulling over on the side of a road not unlike the one in his trench, maybe even the same road, and walking into a small building and picking this bottle off a shelf and paying for it with paper currency or a metal card or whatever they used, and carrying it back to their vehicle and driving on. Driving home, probably. Setting the bottle on a shelf in a room where they lived, never thinking about it again. 90,000 years later, it was the last physical object that proved that roadside shop had existed at all. "What was here before them?" he said quietly. Pell frowned. "Before whom?" "The Vithrani." "Before everything. Before the departure, before the occupation, before the first contact. What was here? What was this place?" "You know the answer to that, Dale. You dig it up every day." "I know. I'm asking whether anyone in Rampart Command knows." He turned the bottle slowly under the imaging lamp. The faded label caught the light, and for a moment the word root was clear and sharp, as though it had been printed yesterday. Because they're about to have a conversation with the people who colonized this planet 90,000 years ago and treated us like an interesting species of insect. And I would like someone in that conversation to remember what we were before they arrived. What we built on our own, what we lost because of them, and what we kept anyway. Pell studied him, then she picked up her comm. "Who are you calling?" he asked. "General Ashara Tain, Western Rampart Command." "You just made yourself relevant, Dale." The briefing room was underground, beneath the rampart's command layer, in a hardened chamber that smelled of recycled air and quiet authority. Dale had never been inside a military facility this deep. The walls were smooth, featureless, and the lighting was even designed to eliminate shadow, to leave no corner unexamined. General Tain was a small woman with iron-gray hair, and the kind of stillness that made Dale think of load-bearing walls. She sat at the head of a long table surrounded by officers, intelligence analysts, and a civilian specialist he recognized as Yara Osa, the Tethys Institute's xenohistorian. Tain had listened to Pell's request without expression, then looked at Dale the way a mason looks at a stone, assessing its shape, its weight, whether it fits the wall she's building. "Dr. Marin, you study the pre-consolidation period." "Yes, General." "How deep?" "As deep as the record goes. I specialize in the late Anthropocene, the period immediately before and during the Vithrani occupation. The ordinary layers, civilian infrastructure, domestic sites." "Roads," Tain said. There was no mockery in her voice. "Roads, houses, workplaces, schools. The things people built when they were just people before they had to be anything else." Tain nodded slowly. "Sit down, Dr. Marin. We have a problem, and it may be your kind of problem." He sat. The briefing was quick and direct, delivered by a Major Torin Cade with the clipped precision of someone who had rehearsed the essentials and trimmed the fat. The Vithrani fleet was 61 vessels, and growing. The final count would settle at 64 before the day was out. A configuration consistent with a communion administrative convoy, not a war fleet. The ships were old by Vithrani standards. Spectral analysis of their drive emissions suggested hull construction dating to approximately the period of the departure, meaning these ships or their direct descendants had been part of the original colonial force. They carried no apparent weapons platforms beyond standard defensive arrays. Their deceleration profile indicated an intention to achieve stable orbit, not a combat approach. They had not responded to hails. The problem was not the fleet. The Tethys Defense Network warships, orbital platforms, the planetary shield grid, the Rampart batteries, and the deep space interdiction systems could handle 64 Vithrani colonial era vessels without strain. The Tethys warship fleet alone outnumbered the Vithrani convoy, and each human warship outmassed the largest Vithrani vessel by a factor of 11. The problem was what the Vithrani might be coming back for, and what it would mean to give it to them or refuse. "Intelligence has identified 3 probable objectives," Cade said, advancing a display that showed a map of Earth's surface with highlighted markers. "First, the sealed resource caches the communion left behind during the departure. We've located and cataloged most of these over the millennia. They contain raw materials, some technology, and biological samples. All of it has been studied, archived, and in many cases integrated into our own infrastructure. Second marker, the Vithrani deep site installations, colonial administrative centers, research stations, and what we believe was a central data repository, their institutional memory of the occupation period. The locations of several of these are known, others are suspected but unconfirmed. Third marker, and this is the one that concerns us. The display zoomed to a location in the Western Reclamation Zone. Dale recognized it immediately. The marker sat directly on top of his excavation site, Site 12. "Dr. Marin," Tain said, "what have you found under that road?" The question landed like a fist. He had been digging at Site 12 for 4 years. The road was his primary feature, a pre-consolidation surface highway that he had been exposing and mapping, meter by meter, tracing its path across the landscape. But 3 months ago, while extending a lateral trench to follow the road's northern bearing, his ground-penetrating survey had detected something unexpected beneath the road's substrate. A structure. Large, deep, and made of materials that did not match any known geological or archaeological profile. He had filed the preliminary report. He had been assembling a deep excavation proposal. He had not yet reached the structure itself. "I've detected a subsurface anomaly approximately 90 meters below the road surface," he said carefully. "The ground-penetrating survey indicates a constructed space, roughly 300 meters in lateral extent, composed of non-terrestrial materials. I have not breached it. I don't know what's inside." Tane and Cade exchanged a look. "We do," Tane said. "Or rather, we have a theory. 30 years ago, an intelligence review of the Departure-era archives identified a reference to what the Vithrani called the Remembering Chamber, a sealed installation where the Communion stored records of the civilizations they had studied during colonial operations. Not resources, not technology, cultural records. Detailed documentation of the indigenous peoples they encountered, their languages, their art, their social structures, their beliefs. The Communion regarded these records as property. When they departed, they sealed the chamber and left it buried, intending to retrieve it at a later date." Dale's breath caught. Cultural records of pre-contact humanity, before the occupation, before the departure, before everything you spend your career looking for. The room was very quiet. 90,000 years of ordinary human life, Dale said, recorded by the Vithrani while they were here. That is the working theory, and we believe the Vithrani fleet is here to collect it. He looked at the display. His dig site, marked in amber, sitting in the flat brown landscape of the reclamation zone. The road beneath his boots that morning, leading north into the dust. And beneath the road, buried deeper than he had yet reached, a chamber full of everything his grandfather had spent a lifetime trying to find in fragments and shards and faded mosaics, the complete record of what humanity had been before the sky opened and the strangers came down. "You can't let them take it," he said. Tane's expression did not change. "That is one option. There are others." "There are no others." His voice was harder than he intended. "General, I have spent my entire career recovering scraps, fragments, a piece of a road, a bottle with a faded label, a mosaic floor in a collapsed school. I piece together what I can, and I fill in the gaps with educated guesses, and every reconstruction I build is incomplete because 90,000 years of erosion and tectonics and reconstruction have destroyed most of the evidence. If there is a complete record down there recorded by observers who were present during the pre-contact period, that is the most important archaeological find in the history of this planet. It is not property to be handed over. It is not a bargaining chip. It is who we were." "Dr. Marin," Tane's voice was level, "I did not bring you here to argue. I brought you here because you understand what is at stake in a way that my tactical officers do not. The question is not whether we can stop the Vithrani from taking the chamber. We can. The question is what we say to them when they arrive, and what it means that we kept it." He stared at her. "We knew," Tane said. "Rampart Command has known about the probable location of the Remembering Chamber for 30 years. We chose not to excavate it. We chose to let it remain sealed beneath the road, beneath the landscape, beneath the layers of everything we built on top of it. Because the decision to open it to see what the Vithrani recorded about us was not one we wanted to make hastily. You were afraid of what was inside. We were patient. There is a difference." Tane folded her hands on the table. 90,000 years of patience, Dr. Marin. Humanity rebuilt this planet from ruin. We did not do it by rushing. We did it by remembering and by being ready when the time came. The time has come." 12 hours later, Dale stood on the observation level of the Tethys inner wall and watched the sky change. The Vithrani fleet was visible now not as individual ships, but as a constellation of points in the upper atmosphere, moving in slow formation. 64 lights arranged in rows of 8, descending in lockstep, their old drives leaving faint trails of ionized gas in the upper stratosphere. The defense platforms had tracked them since they crossed the heliopause, and the tracking data was publicly available on the city's information network, a deliberate choice by Rampart Command. Transparency was part of the defense posture. The population knew what was coming, and the population was calm, because the population could see the math. 64 colonial-era vessels against a planetary defense network that had spent 90,000 years preparing for this exact category of event. The Tethys warships, 9 of them, each kilometers long, hanging in the lower atmosphere like dark mountains, had moved into position without fanfare, arranging themselves in a pattern that Dale recognized from his study of consolidation-era military doctrine. It was not an attack formation. It was a frame, a visible perimeter that said, "We see you and we are here, and you will go no further than we allow." Below the warships, the inner wall's weapons batteries had rotated to face skyward, their long barrels gleaming in the late light. The planetary shield network hummed at standby. Dale could feel it as a low vibration through the wall structure, a frequency so deep it registered more in the bones than in the ears. The wall's observation level was a broad platform at the 200-meter mark, open to the sky, used by military personnel and approved civilians. Dale had been given clearance by Taine's office. He stood at the eastern railing, the city of Tethys spread behind him in layered tiers of light and structure, and watched the points of light descend. His grandfather would have wanted to see this. The thought came without permission, the way grief always did, not a decision to remember but a failure to stop remembering. Oren Marin, kneeling in the dust of a ruined school, brushing tiles with his bare hands. Oren Marin, sitting at his desk in the institute, surrounded by ceramic fragments and corroded nails, and the small, unremarkable refuse of people who had no idea that their garbage would outlast their gods. Oren, in his last months, sitting by the window in the evening light, watching the orbital platforms cross the sky. "We build on top of them," Oren had said once, late at night when the wine was low and his guard was down. "Every generation we build on top of the one before. We pour our foundations into their rubble. We run our conduits through their walls. We plant our gardens in their graves. And we tell ourselves it's progress because the buildings are taller and the lights are brighter. But underneath, Dale, underneath all of it, there's a road that someone built with their hands, and a house where someone raised a family, and a field where someone planted something and hoped it would grow. And none of it gets remembered. None of it makes the history, because history is about the big things, and those people were small." "They weren't small," Dale had said. "No," Oren agreed. "They weren't, but we act as though they were, and that's the same thing in the end." The first Vithrani shuttle came down at dawn. Dale watched it from the briefing room's live feed, a blunt, utilitarian craft, its hull darkened with age, descending through the atmosphere toward a designated landing zone on the reclamation plain, 4 kilometers east of his dig site. Its design was recognizable from the departure-era records, the same angular geometry, the same hull plating configuration, but 90,000 years of wear showed in every panel line. Scorch marks from centuries of atmospheric entries. Pitted metal where micrometeorite impacts had chewed through the outer coating. A vessel that had been in continuous service since before humanity had built its first orbital platform. The shuttle was escorted by 2 Tethys atmospheric interceptors, flanking it at a respectful distance with weapons cold but visible. Each interceptor was newer than the Vithrani shuttle by orders of magnitude, sleek, angular craft whose hulls were coated in adaptive surface material that shifted color with the sky. The message was clear. You may land, but you land where we tell you, and you land knowing what surrounds you. The shuttle settled on the engineered grassland with a hiss of landing jets. Its ramp lowered, and out of it came the Vithrani. Dale had seen images, archive reconstructions, artistic renderings, a few grainy sensor captures from the departure-era records, but images did not prepare him for the reality. They were taller than humans by a full head, with elongated limbs and narrow torsos. Their skin was pale lavender, almost translucent in the morning light, with a visible network of darker veins beneath the surface that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic glow. Their faces were broad and flat, with wide-set eyes that had no visible iris, just a deep, luminous amber that seemed to take in everything at once. They moved with a fluid, unhurried grace that Dale recognized as the body language of a species that had never, in living memory, needed to rush. There were 6 of them. 4 were clearly soldiers armored in segmented plates of a dull bronze alloy, weapons holstered at their hips, their amber eyes scanning the landscape with the systematic attention of professionals assessing a tactical environment. The other 2 were different. They wore robes of deep blue over lighter armor, and they carried no weapons. One was older, visibly aged, with deeper lines in the lavender skin and a slight stoop to the narrow shoulders. The other was younger, sharper, with a bearing that suggested authority. The younger one was the one Dale watched, because the younger one's eyes found the dig site, found the dark scar of the excavation trench, 4 kilometers away but visible on the flat plain, and stopped. And in that moment, the amber luminescence in those eyes flickered, and something crossed the broad, alien face that Dale recognized as clearly as if it had been written in his own language. Recognition, and then quickly suppressed, something very close to hunger. They know exactly what's down there, Dale thought, and they've come 90,000 years to take it back. The older robed Vithrani, the one with the stoop and the deep lines, did not look at the dig site. His gaze moved slowly across the landscape, taking in the defense emplacements on the ridges, the warships in the sky, the inner wall on the eastern horizon. His expression was harder to read than the younger one's, but Dale, who had spent his career learning to read the remains of cultures he could never speak to, saw something he recognized. The slow, awful recalculation of someone who has arrived expecting one thing and found another. The older Vithrani had left this world 90,000 years ago, or his ancestors had, and in his records it was a planet of mud roads and wooden structures, and a species that had not yet invented the wheel. Now the sky was full of warships that dwarfed his own fleet, and the ground was laced with defense systems that made his armor look decorative. General Tain met the Vithrani delegation at the landing zone. Dale watched the meeting on the live feed, sitting beside Pell and Osa in the briefing room, surrounded by officers who spoke in low voices and tracked data on their screens. The meeting was formal, conducted through translation systems that rendered the Vithrani language, a complex tonal system that sounded to Dale like wind chimes played in sequence into clipped, precise human speech. The younger robed Vithrani introduced herself as Keeper Sareth Vin, cultural administrator of the Vithrani Communion's archival authority. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone who considered the conversation's outcome predetermined. "We are here to recover materials belonging to the Communion," Sareth Vin said. Specifically, the sealed cultural archive designated as Repository 14, located at the coordinates our records indicate as the Western Continental Administrative Zone of your planet. The archive was sealed at the time of the Communion's departure and remains the legal property of the archival authority. We request access to the site, recovery of the archive's contents, and departure. Tain listened without expression. Then she said, "Keeper Vin, welcome to Earth. We have some things to discuss." The discussion lasted 9 hours. Dale was not present for most of it. He sat in the briefing room with Pell and Osa and watched the live feed when it was available and listened to fragments relayed by Osa when it was not. The briefing room had a window that faced west, toward the reclamation zone, and through it Dale could see the flat brown landscape stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, beneath 4 years of careful excavation, Beneath a road that someone had poured 90,000 years ago, the chamber waited. He could almost feel its presence the way you can feel the presence of a locked room in a house you know well. Something behind the door. Something patient. Osa relayed the conversation as it unfolded, and it circled the same fundamental disagreement from 9 different angles. The Vithrani position. The archive was theirs. They had created it, sealed it, and left it with the intention of returning. The fact that 90,000 years had elapsed was, in their framework, irrelevant. The archive was property. Property did not expire. Humanity's position, as articulated by Taine. The archive was created on Earth, from observations of Earth's people, during a period of colonial occupation that Earth had not consented to. The contents of the archive were not the Vithrani's culture. They were humanity's culture, recorded without permission by an occupying force. Humanity had a prior and superior claim to its own history. The Vithrani did not understand the objection. Their cultural framework did not contain the concept. To them, observation was creation. They had recorded it, therefore it was theirs. The subjects of the recording were irrelevant. Dale listened to this with a tightening in his chest that he recognized as the same feeling he got when he found a dig site that had been looted, the artifacts removed, the context destroyed, the story of the place reduced to a hole in the ground, and a catalog of what was missing. They had watched us, he thought. They had sat in their colonial installations and watched us build roads and raise children and plant crops and make art and bury our dead. They had recorded it all with the dispassionate thoroughness of naturalists documenting an interesting ecosystem. And then they had sealed the recordings in a vault and left, the way a collector seals specimens in jars. And now they wanted their jars back. At hour 3, Osa relayed a detail that made Dale set down his coffee and stare at the wall. The Vithrani had brought an inventory, a complete manifest of everything they expected to find in the archive, cataloged by category and indexed by date. They had the list in hand. They knew how many recordings were in the chamber. They knew the subjects. They had left Earth with a receipt, and 90,000 years later they had come back with it, expecting to collect the goods. At hour 6, Taine called for a recess. During the break, she summoned Dale to her office, a spare, functional room off the main briefing chamber. "Dr. Marin, I need you to do something." "Name it." "I need you to open the chamber." He stared at her. "The Vithrani are not going to accept our legal arguments," Taine said. "They don't have the conceptual framework. To them, property is property. But they are not stupid and they are not cruel. They are coming from a position of genuine belief that they are collecting their own belongings. If I am going to change that belief, I need to show them what those belongings actually are." She paused. "I need you to go down there, open the seal, and bring something back. Something that shows them, and shows us what they recorded. In 36 hours I couldn't even. You have the deep excavation equipment you requested in your proposal. I approved it 2 hours ago. You have a full military engineering team standing by. And you have the ground-penetrating survey data that shows exactly where the seal is. It took me 4 years to get to the road surface. You want me to go 90 meters deeper in 12 hours. That's when the Vithrani return for the second session. I need something in my hand when they walk in." Dale looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll need Pell." They reached the site by nightfall. The excavation trench was as he had left it, sealed, the road surface visible at the bottom, the prefab station dark on the ridge above. The military engineering team had arrived before him, and the site was transformed. Floodlights on tall masts, a heavy drill rig positioned over the northern extension of the trench, armored vehicles parked in a perimeter, and soldiers with an air of practiced efficiency that made Dale's archaeological field camps look like hobbyist workshops. He and Pell descended into the trench and walked the road. It was the same road, the same cracked asphalt, the same faded paint lines, but it felt different now. The knowledge of what lay beneath it, the sealed chamber, the Vithrani records, the 90,000-year-old testimony of a world that no longer existed, changed the road the way knowing a person's name changes their face. It was no longer an artifact. It was a lid. And beneath it, sealed in alien crystal, were the people Dale had spent his life trying to find. The survey data shows the chamber's upper surface at approximately 88 meters below our current level, Pell said, reading from a tablet. The seal is a composite structure non-terrestrial alloy, consistent with Vithrani construction materials from the departure era. It should be breachable with the military drill, but we'll want to be careful. If there are preservation systems still active inside, a hard breach could compromise the contents. Then we don't breach hard, Dale said. We go slow. We find the seal, we assess it, and we find the way in that the Vithrani intended to use when they came back. You think there's a designed entry. They sealed it for retrieval. That means there's a door. We just have to find it. They found it at 3 in the morning, 71 meters down. The drill team had cut a shaft alongside the road's northern bearing, following the natural stratigraphy to avoid destabilizing the archaeological layers. At 71 meters, the shaft wall changed. The sandstone and compacted sediment gave way to a smooth, dark surface, the upper hull of the chamber, curving gently downward, its surface unmarked and seamless except for a single feature. A circular depression, roughly 2 meters in diameter, set into the hull like a drain cover in a floor. Dale rappelled down the shaft and put his hand on the surface. It was warm, not from the drilling, warm from within. After 90,000 years, something inside the chamber was still running. The heat was faint but unmistakable, a steady, living warmth that seeped through the alloy and into his palm. He had felt something like it once before, years ago, pressing his hand against the outer wall of the Tethys geothermal plant. The deep, patient heat of a system designed to run forever. Pell, he said, it's active. I can see that from here. Her voice came down the shaft, edged with a wonder she was trying to suppress. My instruments are showing a stable internal temperature of 18 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric composition inside, as far as the sensors can read through the hull, is nitrogen-oxygen, pressure equalized, humidity controlled. Dale, they built a climate-controlled preservation vault 90,000 years ago, and it is still functioning. That's not engineering, that's a promise. There, Pell said from above, pointing her light at the circular depression. That's the access point. See the markings around the rim. He looked, faint glyphs etched into the dark alloy, spiraling inward toward the center of the circle. Vithrani script. He could not read it, but the pattern was familiar. He had seen similar markings on departure-era artifacts recovered from colonial sites across the continent. Can you image these? He called up. Already running. Give me 10 minutes. While Pell processed the glyphs, Dale sat on the edge of the shaft and looked up. The shaft was a vertical tube of excavated earth, its walls shored with military bracing. At the top, the sky was visible, a circle of stars, with the faint glow of the defense platforms crossing. Somewhere up there, 64 Vithrani ships hung in orbit, and 9 human warships held their frame around them, and the fate of a 90,000-year-old record of ordinary human life hung in the balance. His grandfather's voice, from a long time ago, we look at what everyone else walks over. He wondered what Oren would have said if he could see this. Not the warships. Oren had never cared about the warships. Not the defense platforms or the shield network, or the vast military infrastructure that humanity had built over 90,000 years of patient, disciplined preparation. Oren would have looked at this shaft, at this smooth, dark hull beneath the road, and he would have said, someone built this, not a machine, a person. They chose to put it here. They chose to record what they saw, and they left it for whoever came after. Except the Vithrani had not left it for anyone. They had left it for themselves. That was the difference. That was the gap between observation and understanding, between recording a life and knowing what it meant to live one. Pell's voice came down the shaft. Dale, the glyphs are a combination lock. Standard Communion Archive Protocol I cross-referenced with OSA's database. The sequence is keyed to a V-Thrani administrative code. OSA is sending us the cipher now. 20 minutes later, the circle turned. The alloy moved with a smooth, silent precision that spoke of engineering designed to outlast geological time. The depression sank inward, then slid aside, revealing a shaft that descended into soft blue light. Dale went down. The interior of the chamber was exactly as General Taine had theorized and nothing like Dale had imagined. It was not a vault or a warehouse. It was a cathedral. The space was vast, 300 meters wide, 60 meters high, carved from the bedrock and lined with the same dark alloy as the outer hull. The blue light came from bioluminescent strips embedded in the walls, still glowing after 90,000 years, casting everything in a soft aquatic hue. The air was cool, dry, and utterly still. No dust, no decay. The preservation system had maintained the interior in a state of suspended time. And the walls were covered with records. Not digital storage, not data crystals or magnetic media or any of the information formats that Dale's civilization used. The V-Thrani had recorded humanity's pre-contact culture in their own medium, a crystalline lattice system that stored information as patterns of refracted light within transparent panels. The panels covered every surface, floor to ceiling, arranged in concentric rings that spiraled outward from the center of the chamber. Each panel was roughly a meter square, and each contained what Dale's training told him was a complete sensory record, visual, auditory, olfactory, tactile of a moment in pre-contact human life. He walked to the nearest panel and looked into it. Light shifted, and suddenly he was looking at a woman, a human woman, young, dark-haired, standing in a field of wheat. She was holding a bundle of cut stalks against her hip, and she was looking at something off to the side, something that made her smile. The image was not flat. It had depth and presence. He could see the individual grains on the wheat stalks, the calluses on her hands, the way the wind moved in her hair. He could almost hear the wheat rustling. He could almost feel the sun on her skin. She was nobody, she was everyone. She was a person who had lived and worked and smiled at something on an ordinary day in an ordinary field, and an alien observer had recorded her with the same care that Dale used to stabilize a ceramic fragment under nitrogen gas. He moved to the next panel. A man repairing a stone wall, his hands covered in morite. A child running along a shoreline, footprints filling with water behind them. Two old men sitting on a bench beneath a tree, not speaking, just sitting. A woman painting, her brush leaving a stroke of red across a surface Dale could not quite see. A group of people gathered around a table, eating, their faces animated with conversation. A man walking along a road at dusk, alone, his shadow long behind him. A road. The image hit him like a physical blow. A road, not his road, not the specific stretch of asphalt in his excavation trench, but a road of the same era, the same kind. Two lanes, painted lines stretching into a landscape of low hills and dry grass, and a man walking along it, unhurried, carrying something in his hand, a bag maybe, or a bundle, walking toward whatever was at the end of the road, walking home maybe, or away from home, or just walking the way people walk when the destination matters less than the motion. Dale stood in front of that panel for a long time. His throat ached, his eyes burned. He was not a man who cried easily, but the weight of it, the sheer, accumulated weight of 90,000 years of forgetting. And here was the remembering, preserved in alien crystal by observers who had not understood what they were recording, pressed down on him until something cracked. These were the people, the ordinary people, the ones who built the roads and repaired the walls and planted the wheat and walked alone at dusk, the ones whose names had been lost, whose faces had been erased, whose small, daily acts of living had been buried under 90 millennia of progress and catastrophe and reconstruction. the ones Oren Marin had spent his life trying to find in fragments. And the Vithrani had kept them, not out of love or respect or understanding, out of habit, out of the naturalist's compulsion to record. They had watched these people the way a biologist watches specimens in a habitat, and they had preserved the recordings the way a collector preserves butterflies pinned and labeled and sealed under glass. The recordings were beautiful, and they were a violation, and they were irreplaceable, and they were his. They were humanity's. They were the faces of the ancestors, staring back across 90,000 years with the unself-conscious honesty of people who did not know they were being watched. He walked deeper into the chamber. The panels continued in their concentric spirals, thousands of them, tens of thousands, each one a window into a single moment. He found a panel showing a funeral, a group of people standing around a grave, heads bowed, holding each other. He found one showing a market stalls and crowds, and a woman laughing while she handed fruit to a child. He found one showing a man teaching a boy to throw a ball, the boy's arm cocked back awkwardly, the man's hand guiding the motion, each one precise, complete, and utterly devoid of commentary. The Vithrani had recorded these moments with no annotation, no context, no attempt to explain what they meant. They had captured the surface of human life and missed the depth entirely. And yet the depth was there. It lived in the way the woman at the funeral gripped the arm of the man beside her, in the way the boy's tongue poked from the corner of his mouth as he concentrated on the throw, in the way the woman in the wheat field smiled at something the observer could not see. The Vithrani had built a cathedral of human memory and had not realized that it was sacred. Dale carefully detached one panel from its mounting, the one with the man on the road, and carried it back to the shaft. The second session with the Vithrani began at noon. General Tain had arranged it in a ground-level conference space at the landing zone, not the underground briefing chamber, a deliberate choice, Dale thought. She wanted the sky visible. She wanted the warships visible. She wanted the Vithrani to see, at every moment, the scale of what they were dealing with. Keeper Sareth Vin entered with the same calm authority as before. Her amber eyes swept the room, catalogued its occupants, and settled on the object that Dale had placed on the table in front of his seat. The crystal panel, propped upright on a small stand, the image of the man on the road visible within its depths. "You opened the archive," Sareth Vin said. "It was not a question." "We opened the door you left for yourselves," Tain said. "We looked inside, and we found what Dr. Marin is about to show you." Dale stood. His hands were steady. His voice was not, and he did not try to make it so. "Keeper Vin, my name is Dale Marin. I am an archaeologist. I study the period of Earth's history that your people observed during your colonial presence here, the time before the departure, before the occupation changed everything. I have spent my entire career looking for the remnants of the people who lived here then. The ordinary people. The ones who built the roads and farmed the land and made things with their hands. The ones your records classify as pre-industrial indigenous population." He turned the panel so its image faced Sareth Vin directly. "This is one of them. I don't know his name. I don't know where he was going. I don't know what he was carrying or whether he ever got where he was going. I know that he walked along a road on a day that mattered to no one except him, and one of your observers recorded it. And that recording survived for 90,000 years in a chamber beneath the ground where I have been digging for 4 years, looking for exactly this." Sareth Vin's amber eyes studied the panel. Her expression was unreadable. The broad, flat features of her face did not map to human emotional registers. But her gaze lingered on the image, and the luminescent veins beneath her skin pulsed with a slightly altered rhythm. "The archive is the property of the archival authority," she said, but the certainty in her voice had shifted, almost imperceptibly. "The archive is a record of our people," Dale said. "Your observers made it. Your technology preserved it. But the people inside those panels, the woman in the field, The man repairing the wall, the child on the shore, the man on the road, they are ours. They are us. They are the reason this planet rebuilt itself after you left. Not because we wanted to be strong, because we remembered what we were and we refused to let it disappear. The silence in the room was the kind of silence that has weight. Sareth Vin looked at the panel for a long time. Then she looked at Tane. Then she looked at the sky through the conference space's transparent wall, at the warships, the defense platforms, the vast infrastructure of a civilization that had spent 90,000 years becoming something the Vithrani had never expected. "Your world has changed," Sareth Vin said. "Yes," Tane said. "You are not what we recorded." "No, we are what grew from what you recorded, and we are not willing to let you take the roots." Another silence. Outside the conference space, the warships held their positions in the bright sky. The rampart batteries tracked their slow arcs. The shield network maintained its low hum. 90,000 years of preparation, manifest in metal and energy, and the quiet, implacable readiness of a civilization that had learned one lesson and never forgotten it. We were caught unready once. We will not be caught unready again. The Vithrani fleet hung in orbit like a reminder of what had happened the last time, and the human defense network surrounded it like the answer that had been building ever since. Sareth Vin's gaze returned to the panel. The man on the road, walking alone, carrying his bundle, heading toward whatever lay at the end of the pavement. A nobody, a human being, a person who had lived and walked and been seen by eyes that did not belong to his world. "The communion does not have a protocol for this," Sareth Vin said quietly. "Then make one," Dale said. The negotiation that followed took 3 days. Dale was present for most of it, sitting beside Tane and Osa, serving as what Tane privately called the moral anchor. The Vithrani were not hostile. They were not even, in any recognizable sense, adversarial. They were confused. Their entire cultural framework for dealing with colonial-era archives was built on the assumption that the subjects of observation were static, that the people they had recorded would either be gone or unchanged. They had no model for a species that had been observed, colonized, abandoned, and then spent 90,000 years becoming something that the observers could no longer categorize. On the second day, Sareth Vin asked to see the chamber herself. Tane agreed on condition that Dale accompany her. They descended together, the keeper and the archaeologist, side by side in the narrow shaft, neither speaking. When Sareth Vin stepped into the chamber and saw the panels, she stopped. For a long time she did not move. She stood at the edge of the concentric rings and looked at the records her predecessors had made: the woman in the wheat field, the children on the shore, the man walking the road, and her broad, alien face showed something that Dale had not expected to see. Not greed, not satisfaction, something closer to grief. "We did not know them," Sareth Vin said quietly. "We recorded them. We cataloged their behaviors and their structures and their social patterns, but we did not know them." "No," Dale said, "you didn't. We thought that was enough, to observe, to preserve the observation. We did not consider that the observation itself was incomplete." She turned to face him. The amber eyes were steady, but the luminescent veins beneath her skin pulsed erratically. "Your species does not exist in these panels. Only its surface does. The rest, the meaning beneath the gestures, the reason a woman smiles in a wheat field, the weight of a man walking alone, that was never ours to keep." The compromise, when it came, grew from that moment. It took another day and a half of negotiation: language barriers, cultural barriers, the fundamental challenge of translating between two civilizations that had developed in isolation for 90,000 years. Tane handled the political architecture. Osa handled the linguistic framework. Dale handled the only argument that mattered: these are our people, and they belong here. The archive would remain on Earth, in the chamber under joint stewardship. A copy, a complete duplicate, made with Vithrani technology under human supervision, would be provided to the archival authority for their records. Humanity would be granted full access to the original panels for study, conservation, and public exhibition. The Vithrani would retain the right to visit the archive on a schedule negotiated through diplomatic channels. The chamber itself would be preserved as a site of shared significance, the place where two civilizations, separated by 90,000 years and incompatible frameworks, found the thin, fragile common ground of admitting that a woman smiling in a wheat field mattered. The original panels would stay, the man on the road would stay, the woman in the wheat field would stay, the child on the shore would stay. They would stay because they were home. On the fourth morning, Dale went back to the trench. The Vithrani shuttles were departing, rising in sequence from the landing zone, climbing toward the fleet that still hung in high orbit. One by one, like sparks rising from a dying fire, they lifted from the grassland and climbed through the morning air, their old drives leaving faint trails that the wind dissolved within minutes. The human warships maintained their frame, steady and patient, watching the departure with the same calm vigilance they had maintained since the fleet arrived. The defense platforms tracked each shuttle until it docked with its carrier. The rampart batteries held their elevation. The shield network hummed its low, subsonic note. Nothing fired, nothing needed to. Soreth Vin had been the last to leave. She had stood at the foot of her shuttle's ramp and looked back at the dig site one final time. Dale had been watching from the briefing room feed. She had not waved or spoken. She had simply stood there, her amber eyes steady, the luminescent veins beneath her lavender skin pulsing with their slow rhythm, and then she had turned and walked up the ramp, and the ramp had closed behind her. A 90,000-year absence, ended and resumed in 4 days. Dale climbed down into the excavation trench and stood on the road. The asphalt was cool under his boots. The morning sun slanted into the trench from the east, casting long shadows along the walls. He could see the stratigraphy, the layers of time, compressed and visible, each one a chapter in a story that most people would never read. Below him, 90 meters down, the chamber waited. Its blue light still glowed. Its panels still held their images. The man on the road still walked toward whatever lay ahead. He took out his field recorder. Marin, Site 12, Day 1 of the new excavation. The road continues north. I'm going to follow it. He pressed the stop button and clipped the recorder to his belt. Above him, the sky was clearing. The last Vithrani shuttle was a bright point diminishing into blue. The defense platforms resumed their slow transit across the arc of the sky. The warships held their positions, unhurried, watching everything with the patient attention of a civilization that had learned to wait. Dale knelt and placed his hand on the road surface. The aggregate was rough beneath his palm. Someone had mixed this. Someone had poured it. Someone had smoothed it with tools and walked away, leaving it for whoever came after. He thought of his grandfather, kneeling in the dust of a ruined school, brushing colored tiles with his bare hands. They weren't small, he said quietly. The road led north. He would follow it. And whatever he found at the end, another town, another school, another life laid down in layers of ordinary stone and ordinary time, he would bring it back into the light and make sure it was remembered. That was the work. That was always the work, not the warships or the walls or the defense platforms that ringed the planet like a crown of patient iron. The work was the road. The work was the hand on the stone. The work was looking down at what everyone else walked over and saying, "You were here and you mattered, and we did not forget." The sun climbed. The trench filled with light. And Dale Marin, archaeologist, 53 years old, grandson of a man who had spent his life looking at the small things, walked the road north and did not stop.